Sarah Martinez had always been a quiet observer. At 32, she worked as a freelance photographer, traveling frequently between assignments. Her camera bag was her constant companion, filled with lenses that captured moments others missed. She preferred watching life unfold through her viewfinder rather than being the center of attention herself. The morning of September 15th started like any other travel day. Sarah checked her equipment twice before heading to Denver International Airport. She was flying to Seattle for a wedding assignment, a simple job that would pay her rent for the next 2 months. Her flight was scheduled for 10:30 a.m., giving her plenty of time to grab coffee and review her shot list. The airport buzzed with typical morning energy. Business travelers rushed past families dragging oversized luggage. Sarah found her gate and settled into a corner seat, pulling out her laptop to edit photos from her previous assignment. She noticed the man sitting across from her fidgeting with his jacket zipper, but thought nothing of it. Airports made everyone nervous. Flight 447 to Seattle was a Boeing 737 with 156 passengers aboard. Sarah had managed to snag a window seat in row 14, perfect for capturing aerial shots of the Rocky Mountains during takeoff. She stowed her camera bag carefully in the overhead bin, keeping only her small backup camera in the seat pocket in front of her. The passenger manifest included families heading home from vacation, business people traveling for meetings, and a handful of military personnel in civilian clothes. Among them was Commander Jake Morrison, a Navy SEAL returning from a classified mission briefing. He sat in row 8, his trained eyes automatically scanning the cabin for potential threats. It was a habit he couldn't shake, even on commercial flights. Sarah noticed Morrison during boarding. Something about his posture and the way his eyes moved suggested military training. She had photographed enough veterans for her documentary project to recognize the signs. He carried himself with quiet confidence, alert but not anxious. His presence was somehow reassuring in the cramped cabin. The flight attendants went through their safety demonstration while passengers settled in for the 3-hour journey. Sarah adjusted her camera settings, hoping to catch some good cloud formations during the flight. The weather was perfect, with clear skies promising excellent visibility once they reached cruising altitude. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Sarah felt the familiar excitement of takeoff. She loved flying, especially the moment when the ground fell away and the world became a patchwork quilt below. Her camera was ready, loaded with fresh batteries and an empty memory card. The Boeing 737 lifted off smoothly, climbing steadily through the morning air. Denver's sprawling suburbs gave way to rolling hills, then to the dramatic peaks of the Rocky Mountains. Sarah snapped several shots through the small window, adjusting her settings to compensate for the glare. 30 minutes into the flight, the seatbelt sign turned off. Passengers began moving around the cabin, some heading to the restroom, others stretching their legs. The flight attendants started their beverage service, wheeling carts down the narrow aisles. Sarah was reviewing her photos on her camera's LCD screen when she heard raised voices near the front of the plane. At first, she assumed it was just an impatient passenger complaining about seat assignments or overhead bin space. Such disputes were common on crowded flights. But something in the tone made her look up from her camera. The voices were getting louder, more aggressive. Other passengers were turning their heads, craning their necks to see what was happening in the forward section of the cabin. Then she saw him. The nervous man from the gate area was standing in the aisle near row 5, shouting at a flight attendant. His jacket was unzipped now, revealing what looked like wires wrapped around his chest. Several passengers gasped audibly when they realized what they were seeing. The man's voice carried clearly through the cabin, though his accent made some words difficult to understand. He was demanding that the pilot change course immediately, threatening to detonate what appeared to be an explosive device if his demands weren't met. Panic rippled through the passenger cabin like a wave. Some people started crying. Others reached for their phones despite being at 35,000 feet with no cell service. The flight attendants tried to maintain calm, but their training had never truly prepared them for this moment. Sarah's photographer instincts kicked in. Without thinking, she raised her camera and began documenting what was unfolding. The hijacker was moving erratically, shouting instructions that seemed to change every few seconds. He appeared increasingly unstable, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool cabin temperature. Commander Morrison remained perfectly still in his seat, but Sarah could see his muscles tensing. His head was turned slightly, giving him a clear view of the hijacker while maintaining the appearance of a frightened passenger. His training was evident in every subtle movement or lack thereof. The hijacker produced a handwritten note and thrust it at the lead flight attendant, a woman named Jennifer who had been flying for 15 years. Her hand shook as she read the demands, which included redirecting the flight to an undisclosed location and the release of several prisoners from federal custody. Sarah continued photographing, knowing that these images might be crucial evidence if they survived this ordeal. Her camera's telephoto lens allowed her to capture clear shots of the hijacker's face and the device strapped to his chest. She worked quietly, using the camera's silent mode to avoid drawing attention to herself. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, calm and professional despite the circumstances. He acknowledged that there was a situation aboard the aircraft and asked all passengers to remain seated with their seatbelts fastened. He didn't mention the hijacking directly, but everyone understood the subtext. As minutes passed, the hijacker became more agitated. He paced the narrow aisle, waving his arms and making increasingly wild threats. Several times he seemed to reach for something attached to his chest, causing panic throughout the cabin. Sarah noticed that Commander Morrison had shifted position slightly. He was now angled in his seat in a way that would allow him to spring into action if necessary. His eyes tracked the hijacker's movements with professional precision, calculating distances and timing. The flight attendants did their best to comply with the hijacker's constantly changing demands while secretly communicating with the cockpit crew. Jennifer managed to pass along crucial information about the suspect's behavior and apparent mental state. Through her camera lens, Sarah observed details that might escape casual notice. The hijacker's device looked crude, possibly homemade. His knowledge of aircraft systems seemed limited, suggesting this was not a professionally planned operation. These observations might prove valuable if law enforcement ever had the chance to interview survivors. The tension in the cabin was suffocating. Children were crying despite their parents' attempts to keep them quiet. The elderly passenger in row 12 appeared to be having difficulty breathing, adding medical emergency to the list of problems facing the crew. Sarah's camera battery indicator showed full power, and she had plenty of memory card space remaining. She continued documenting, switching between wide shots that captured the overall scene and close-ups that revealed crucial details about the hijacker and his equipment. Commander Morrison caught her eye briefly, and she saw something in his expression that suggested he was formulating a plan. His military bearing remained hidden beneath the facade of a terrified civilian, but Sarah's trained eye picked up on subtle cues that indicated otherwise. The hijacker suddenly stopped pacing and pointed at a passenger in row 6, demanding that the man move to the back of the plane. His voice was getting hoarse from shouting, and his movements were becoming more erratic. Sarah wondered if he was under the influence of drugs or simply overwhelmed by the stress of the situation he had created. As the crisis entered its second hour, Sarah realized that her documentation of these events might be the only record of what happened aboard Flight 447. She adjusted her camera settings one more time, preparing for whatever might unfold in the coming minutes. The hijacker's demands were becoming increasingly erratic and impossible to fulfill. He wanted the plane to land immediately, but also insisted they continue flying to his original destination. His mental state was deteriorating rapidly, making him far more dangerous than a calculated terrorist would have been. Sarah watched through her camera lens as the man pulled out a cell phone and began trying to make calls. Of course, there was no signal at cruising altitude, which only frustrated him further. He screamed at the flight attendants, blaming them for the lack of communication with the ground. Commander Morrison had been observing the hijacker's pattern for nearly an hour now. The man would pace for 3 to 4 minutes, then stop and shout demands for about 30 seconds, then return to pacing. During his shouting phases, his attention was focused entirely on the flight crew, creating potential windows of opportunity. The device strapped to the hijacker's chest appeared to be a homemade explosive, but Morrison's trained eye noticed several details that suggested it might not be as dangerous as it looked. The wiring seemed random, and the supposed trigger mechanism looked more like a garage door opener than professional detonation equipment. Sarah continued her documentation, switching memory cards when the first one filled up. She had captured hundreds of images, from wide shots showing the entire cabin's terrified passengers to close-ups of the hijacker's face twisted with rage and confusion. Her telephoto lens revealed beads of sweat and dilated pupils that suggested drug use. A passenger in row 9 suddenly stood up and announced he was a doctor, asking if he could help the elderly man who was having breathing difficulties. The hijacker spun around, screaming at the doctor to sit down, but the medical emergency was becoming impossible to ignore. The elderly passenger, later identified as 73-year-old retired teacher Harold Chun, was clearly in distress. His wife held his hand while tears streamed down her face. The doctor, despite the hijacker's threats, moved slowly toward the suffering man. This distraction created the first real opportunity Morrison had seen. The hijacker's attention was completely focused on the doctor and the medical emergency. Morrison's muscles tensed as he calculated the distance between his seat and the hijacker's current position. But the moment passed when the hijacker suddenly realized what was happening and turned his attention back to controlling the cabin. He grabbed the doctor by the shoulder and shoved him back toward his seat, screaming that no one was allowed to move without his permission. Sarah caught this entire exchange on camera, including the moment when Morrison's body language shifted from potential action back to passive observation. She was beginning to understand that the SEAL commander was waiting for the perfect moment, not just any opportunity. The flight attendants had been in constant communication with the cockpit, passing along information about the hijacker's behavior and demands. The pilots were coordinating with ground control and federal authorities, but options were limited while airborne with 156 lives at stake. Jennifer, the lead flight attendant, showed remarkable composure under pressure. She spoke to the hijacker in calm, measured tones, trying to de-escalate his increasingly agitated state. Her years of customer service experience were proving invaluable in managing this ultimate difficult passenger. The hijacker suddenly demanded that all passengers hand over their cell phones and electronic devices. He began moving through the cabin, collecting phones and tablets in a large bag he had brought aboard. When he reached Sarah's row, she reluctantly handed over her phone, but managed to keep her cameras hidden in her seat pocket. As he collected devices, the hijacker's explosive device was clearly visible to more passengers. Several people noticed the same details Morrison had observed: the crude construction and questionable functionality of the supposed bomb. However, no one was willing to bet 156 lives on the possibility that it was fake. Commander Morrison watched as the hijacker moved through the cabin. When a man reached his row, Morrison handed over an old flip phone while keeping his secure military communication device hidden in his jacket pocket. His calm demeanor during the face-to-face encounter impressed Sarah, who captured the exchange from several rows back. The hijacker's collection of electronic devices seemed to exhaust him. He returned to the front of the cabin and slumped into an empty seat, still clutching the bag of phones. For several minutes, he sat quietly, breathing heavily and staring at nothing in particular. During this lull, Morrison made subtle hand gestures that Sarah recognized as some form of military sign language. He was communicating with someone, but she couldn't identify the recipient until she noticed another passenger in row 15 making similar gestures in response. The second man was Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, an Army explosives expert traveling home on leave. He had been watching the hijacker's device with professional interest and had reached conclusions similar to Morrison's about its likely ineffectiveness. Through their silent communication, Morrison and Rodriguez were coordinating a potential response plan. Sarah documented their hand signals, not understanding their meaning, but recognizing their importance for any future investigation. The hijacker's period of rest was brief. He suddenly jumped up and began making new demands, this time insisting that the flight attendants bring him the airplane's emergency equipment. He specifically wanted access to the life vests and emergency slides, though his reasons were unclear. Jennifer explained that the emergency equipment was secured and could only be accessed during actual emergencies. This answer enraged the hijacker, who began threatening to activate his device if his demands weren't met immediately. The tension in the cabin reached new heights as passengers realized the situation was escalating rather than resolving. Parents held their children closer, while others closed their eyes and appeared to be praying. The elderly Mr. Chen's condition continued to deteriorate, adding urgency to an already critical situation. Sarah noticed that Morrison had shifted position again, this time creating a clearer path between his seat and the hijacker's position. Rodriguez had also adjusted his seating, and the two men were now positioned to potentially coordinate an attack from two different angles. The hijacker's demands became increasingly irrational. He wanted to speak directly to the president, demanded the release of prisoners he couldn't clearly identify, and insisted that the plane land at an airport that didn't exist. His grip on reality seemed to be slipping with each passing minute. Through her camera lens, Sarah observed that the hijacker's hands were shaking more noticeably now. His earlier bravado was giving way to panic as he realized that his poorly planned operation was falling apart. The device on his chest had wires hanging loose, suggesting it might have been damaged during his frantic movements around the cabin. Commander Morrison caught Sarah's eye and made a subtle gesture toward her camera. She interpreted this as a request to continue documenting, understanding that her photographs might be crucial evidence in any subsequent investigation or legal proceedings. The flight had been airborne for nearly 3 hours now, well past its scheduled arrival time in Seattle. Ground control was undoubtedly tracking their progress and coordinating response efforts, but passengers had no way of knowing what plans were being made for their rescue. Jennifer announced that the captain would be making another announcement shortly. The hijacker screamed at her to cancel any communication with passengers, but she explained that federal aviation regulations required regular updates during emergency situations. When the pilot's voice came over the intercom, he spoke in careful, measured tones. He explained that they were working to resolve the situation and that passengers should remain calm and follow all instructions from the flight crew. He mentioned that they were in contact with ground authorities, but provided no details about their current location or destination. The hijacker seemed pleased that no specific information was revealed, but he remained agitated about any communication between the cockpit and passengers. He demanded that all future announcements be approved by him first, creating another layer of complexity for the already challenging situation. Sarah's documentation continued as the crisis stretched into its 4th hour. Her camera's memory cards were nearly full, but she had managed to capture a comprehensive record of the hijacking from its beginning through the current standoff. Each photograph might prove crucial for understanding how events unfolded and why certain decisions were made. The moment that would change everything was approaching, though none of the passengers realized it yet. The breaking point came when Harold Chun suddenly collapsed in his seat, his breathing becoming shallow and labored. His wife screamed for help, and the doctor who had tried to assist earlier stood up despite the hijacker's previous warnings. The medical emergency could no longer be ignored. The hijacker spun around, his face red with rage, screaming at everyone to sit down. But Dr. Patricia Williams, a cardiologist from Denver, refused to comply. She pushed past the hijacker's attempts to block her path, declaring that she had a legal and moral obligation to help a patient in distress. Commander Morrison watched as the situation spiraled toward chaos. The hijacker was becoming increasingly unstable, waving his arms wildly and making threats that grew more extreme by the minute. Morrison could see that the man was reaching his breaking point, which made him infinitely more dangerous. Sarah documented every moment through her camera lens. Dr. Williams was now kneeling beside Harold Shun, checking his pulse and trying to assess his condition. The hijacker stood over them, screaming incoherently, while other passengers looked on in terror. The explosive device on the hijacker's chest was now clearly visible to everyone in the forward section of the aircraft. Several wires had come loose during his frantic movements, and the supposed trigger mechanism was hanging by what appeared to be electrical tape. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had been studying the device carefully, using his explosives expertise to assess the actual threat level. His silent communication with Morrison conveyed his professional opinion that the device was likely non-functional, possibly never intended to actually explode. Jennifer, the flight attendant, tried desperately to maintain some control over the situation. She spoke in soothing tones, explaining that the doctor was only trying to save a life and posed no threat to the hijacker's plans. Her words seemed to have little effect on the increasingly agitated man. The hijacker suddenly grabbed Dr. Williams by the arm, trying to pull her away from her patient. This physical contact with a passenger crossed a line that Morrison had been waiting for. The SEAL commander's training kicked in, and he began calculating his response options. Sarah noticed Morrison's shift in posture through her telephoto lens. His entire body language changed from passive observer to coiled spring, ready to launch into action at a moment's notice. She adjusted her camera settings, anticipating that significant action might be imminent. Dr. Williams refused to be moved away from Harold Shun, whose condition was clearly deteriorating. She explained that the man was having a heart attack and would die without immediate medical intervention. Her defiance of the hijacker's orders created a standoff within the larger crisis. The hijacker's response was to reach toward the device on his chest, threatening to activate it if the doctor didn't comply immediately. Several passengers screamed, while others closed their eyes and braced for what they assumed would be an explosion. Morrison made his decision in that instant. The hijacker's attention was entirely focused on Dr. Williams and her refusal to move. His back was partially turned toward Morrison's position, and the aisle was clear for approximately 8 feet between them. The SEAL commander rose from his seat with fluid precision, moving faster than most passengers could follow. His years of combat training had taught him to strike decisively when the opportunity presented itself, and this was clearly that moment. Sarah's camera captured the beginning of Morrison's charge toward the hijacker. Her finger pressed the shutter repeatedly as the commander covered the distance between his seat and his target in less than 2 seconds. The images would later show the intense focus and determination on Morrison's face. The hijacker heard movement behind him and started to turn, but Morrison's training and superior physical condition gave him an overwhelming advantage. The commander's tackle brought both men crashing to the floor of the narrow aisle, with Morrison landing on top. Rodriguez immediately sprang into action as well, rushing forward to assist in subduing the hijacker. His explosives expertise was crucial for safely dealing with the device strapped to the man's chest, which could potentially be dangerous even if it wasn't a real bomb. Sarah continued photographing as the two military personnel worked together to control the hijacker. Morrison used techniques designed to restrain without causing permanent injury, while Rodriguez carefully examined the explosive device to determine the safest way to remove it. The hijacker fought desperately, screaming threats and curses in what appeared to be multiple languages. However, his physical condition was no match for two trained military professionals working in coordination. Within minutes, he was completely subdued and restrained. Jennifer and the other flight attendants moved quickly to assist, bringing zip ties and duct tape that could be used to secure the hijacker until the plane could land. Their emergency training had included basic restraint techniques, though they had never imagined using them in this context. Dr. Williams never stopped working on Harold Shun throughout the struggle. Her focus remained entirely on her patient, even as the violent takedown occurred just feet away from her position. Her dedication to saving a life in the midst of chaos impressed everyone who witnessed it. Rodriguez's examination of the explosive device confirmed his suspicions. The device was essentially a collection of random electronic components held together with tape and wire. It posed no actual explosive threat, though it might have been capable of delivering an electric shock to its wearer. Morrison helped secure the hijacker while maintaining professional control over the situation. His military bearing was now fully visible as he coordinated with Rodriguez and the flight crew to ensure that all threats were neutralized and the cabin was secure. Sarah captured the moment when Morrison removed his service weapon from a concealed holster and handed it to Jennifer for safekeeping. The gesture demonstrated his trust in the flight crew and his understanding of proper protocols for weapons aboard civilian aircraft. The sight of Commander Morrison's sidearm being transferred to civilian custody became one of Sarah's most powerful photographs. It symbolized the transition from military action back to civilian control, even in the aftermath of a successful intervention. With the hijacker secured and the fake explosive device removed, attention could finally turn to Harold Chen's medical emergency. Dr. Williams had managed to stabilize his condition somewhat, but he clearly needed immediate hospitalization upon landing. The captain's voice came over the intercom with the first genuinely positive announcement of the entire ordeal. He reported that the situation had been resolved, the aircraft was secure, and they were being cleared for emergency landing at the nearest suitable airport. Passengers throughout the cabin began crying with relief, hugging strangers, and calling out thanks to Morrison, Rodriguez, and Dr. Williams. The nightmare that had lasted over 4 hours was finally coming to an end. Sarah lowered her camera for the first time in hours, her hands shaking from adrenaline and emotional exhaustion. She had documented every crucial moment of the crisis, creating a photographic record that would prove invaluable for investigators and historians. The hijacker, now fully restrained and silent, appeared to be coming down from whatever substances had fueled his erratic behavior. His earlier bravado had completely vanished, replaced by what looked like confusion about his own actions. Commander Morrison returned to his seat, his mission complete, but his vigilance unchanged. He continued monitoring the cabin and the restrained hijacker, understanding that his responsibilities wouldn't end until the aircraft was safely on the ground and proper authorities took custody of all involved parties. The emergency landing was now less than 30 minutes away, promising an end to the ordeal that had tested everyone aboard Flight 447 to their absolute limits. The emergency descent toward Colorado Springs Airport was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. The pilot pushed the aircraft to its limits, dropping altitude rapidly while maintaining control in what aviation experts would later describe as a textbook emergency approach. Through her window, Sarah could see emergency vehicles already positioned on the runway below. Fire trucks, ambulances, and law enforcement vehicles formed an impressive display of coordinated emergency response. The sight was both reassuring and sobering, highlighting how serious the situation had been. Commander Morrison remained vigilant even as the crisis wound down. His eyes stayed focused on the restrained hijacker, who had become eerily quiet since being subdued. Morrison's military training taught him that threats could resurface unexpectedly, so he maintained his defensive position throughout the descent. Dr. Williams continued monitoring Harold Chen's condition, using improvised medical equipment provided by the flight crew's emergency kit. His vital signs had stabilized somewhat, but he clearly needed advanced cardiac care that only a hospital could provide. Every minute counted for his survival. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had carefully packaged the fake explosive device in a secure container provided by the flight crew. His expertise would be crucial for the FBI's forensic analysis of the hijacker's equipment and methods. Even fake bombs could provide valuable intelligence about terrorist tactics and capabilities. Sarah reviewed the hundreds of photographs she had captured during the ordeal. The images told a complete story of the hijacking, from the initial threat through the heroic intervention and ultimate resolution. she realized that her documentation might be the most comprehensive record of a hijacking ever captured by a civilian. The restrained hijacker occasionally mumbled incoherently, leading Dr. Williams to suggest that he might be experiencing withdrawal from whatever substances had fueled his erratic behavior. This medical assessment would become important for understanding his motivations and legal competency. Jennifer and her fellow flight attendants moved through the cabin, checking on passengers and preparing for the emergency landing. Their professionalism throughout the crisis had been remarkable, maintaining calm and following protocols even when facing life-threatening situations. As the aircraft approached the runway, passengers could see the massive emergency response assembled on the ground. FBI agents, local police, paramedics, and airport security personnel were positioned strategically around the landing area. The scope of the response demonstrated how seriously authorities had taken the threat. The landing itself was smooth despite the emergency circumstances. The pilot's skill and experience were evident in his ability to bring the aircraft down safely while dealing with the stress of a hijacking situation. His calm professionalism had been crucial for maintaining some semblance of order throughout the crisis. Even before the aircraft came to a complete stop, emergency vehicles were moving into position. Paramedics rushed aboard to assess Harold Chen's condition, while FBI agents prepared to take custody of the hijacker. The coordination between different agencies was impressive to witness. Commander Morrison formally identified himself to the FBI agents and provided a brief tactical assessment of the situation. His military credentials and professional handling of the crisis immediately established his credibility with federal authorities. His cooperation would be essential for their investigation. Sarah found herself designated as a key witness due to her photographic documentation of the entire event. FBI agents were particularly interested in her images showing the hijacker's behavior patterns and the fake explosive device. Her unbiased perspective as a civilian observer made her testimony especially valuable. The hijacker was removed from the aircraft on a stretcher, still restrained but now under heavy law enforcement escort. His earlier threats and bravado had given way to apparent confusion and disorientation. Medical evaluation would be necessary before any legal proceedings could begin. Dr. Williams accompanied Harold Chen to the hospital, continuing her care until he could be transferred to cardiac specialists. Her dedication throughout the crisis had undoubtedly saved his life. Later reports would confirm that he suffered a mild heart attack, but recovered fully thanks to her immediate intervention. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez briefed explosive ordnance disposal experts about the fake device, providing technical details that would help them understand the hijacker's capabilities and intentions. His professional assessment confirmed that the device posed no real explosive threat, but could have delivered dangerous electrical shocks. The passenger evacuation was orderly and efficient, with emergency personnel conducting brief interviews with each person before allowing them to leave the aircraft. Sarah's camera equipment was temporarily confiscated as potential evidence, though she was promised its return after forensic examination. Commander Morrison's sidearm, which had been secured by Jennifer during the crisis, was properly transferred to federal authorities following established protocols. His actions throughout the incident would later earn him commendation from both military and civilian authorities for his courage and professionalism. The media response was immediate and intense. News crews had gathered at the airport within hours of the emergency landing, seeking interviews with passengers and crew members. Sarah found herself reluctant to speak publicly, preferring to let her photographs tell the story instead. FBI investigators were particularly interested in the timing and coordination of Morrison and Rodriguez's intervention. Their military training had clearly been crucial for successfully ending the hijacking without loss of life. The case would become a textbook example of civilian-military cooperation in crisis situations. Initial questioning revealed that the hijacker, identified as 34-year-old Marcus Webb, had a history of mental illness and substance abuse. His motivations appear to be more related to personal psychological problems than any organized terrorist agenda. This discovery would influence how authorities approached similar future threats. Sarah's photographs were immediately classified as crucial evidence in the federal investigation. Her documentation provided an unprecedented visual record of hijacking behavior and passenger response that would be studied by security experts for years to come. The fake explosive device analysis revealed sophisticated knowledge of electronics despite its non-functional nature. Webb had clearly invested considerable time and effort in creating something that looked dangerous, even if it couldn't actually explode. This suggested a level of planning that contradicted his apparent mental instability. Passenger interviews revealed the psychological impact of prolonged exposure to life-threatening stress. Many would require counseling and support in the weeks following the incident. The human cost of terrorism extends far beyond immediate physical threats to include lasting emotional trauma. Commander Morrison's decision to intervene when he did was later analyzed by tactical experts as perfectly timed and executed. His assessment of the threat level, combined with his recognition of the optimal moment for action, demonstrated the value of military training in civilian crisis situations. The aviation industry immediately began studying the incident for lessons about hijacking prevention and response. Changes to security protocols and crew training would eventually result from analysis of what happened aboard Flight 447. The case became a landmark in aviation security history. Sarah's role as an accidental documenter of history was just beginning to unfold. Her photographs would eventually be used in training programs, academic studies, and historical records of aviation security. She had captured a moment that changed how authorities understood hijacking dynamics. The immediate aftermath was chaotic, but organized, with federal authorities taking control of the investigation, while local emergency services provided medical and logistical support. The coordination between different agencies demonstrated years of preparation for such scenarios. As the sun set over Colorado Springs Airport, the last passengers were finally released after giving their statements to investigators. The ordeal that began as a routine flight to Seattle had become a life-changing experience for everyone involved, particularly for the quiet photographer who had documented it all. 3 months after Flight 447, Sarah sat in a federal courthouse in Denver. Her camera equipment finally returned after extensive forensic analysis. The FBI had spent weeks examining every image she captured, using them to build their case against Marcus Webb and to understand the psychological dynamics of hijacking situations. The trial had drawn national attention, not just for the dramatic nature of the hijacking, but for the unprecedented photographic documentation Sarah had provided. Legal experts called her images the most complete civilian record of a terrorist incident ever captured in real time. Commander Morrison testified about his decision-making process during the crisis, explaining how his military training guided his assessment of threats and opportunities. His calm, professional demeanor on the witness stand impressed everyone present, including the judge who would later commend his courage and restraint. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's technical testimony about the fake explosive device revealed the sophisticated yet fundamentally flawed nature of Webb's preparations. The device showed extensive electronic knowledge, but critical gaps in understanding actual explosive mechanisms, suggesting mental illness rather than terrorist training. Dr. Patricia Williams had been recognized with numerous humanitarian awards for her dedication to saving Harold Chin's life during the crisis. Chin himself had made a full recovery and attended every day of the trial, grateful to be alive thanks to her medical intervention. Sarah's photographs were displayed throughout the courtroom proceedings, creating a visual timeline of events that helped jurors understand the complexity and duration of the crisis. Her images captured details that witness testimony alone could never convey, from facial expressions to body language to the physical deterioration of the hijacker over time. The psychological evaluation of Marcus Webb revealed a tragic story of untreated mental illness exacerbated by substance abuse and social isolation. His hijacking attempt was ultimately classified as the desperate act of a severely disturbed individual rather than organized terrorism, though the distinction mattered little to passengers who had feared for their lives. Flight attendant Jennifer received special recognition from the airline industry for her professional handling of the crisis. Her ability to maintain communication between the cockpit and cabin while managing passenger panic had been crucial for the successful resolution of the situation. The aviation industry implemented new security protocols based on lessons learned from Flight 447. Changes included enhanced screening for fake explosive devices, improved crew training for recognizing mental illness indicators, and better coordination procedures between civilian and military personnel during emergencies. Sarah found herself transformed from an anonymous freelance photographer into an accidental expert on crisis documentation. Universities and law enforcement agencies sought her insights into the ethics and techniques of real-time documentation during life-threatening situations. Commander Morrison returned to active duty, but maintained contact with other Flight 447 passengers through an informal support network. His experience became part of military training scenarios, teaching other service members about the unique challenges of intervention in civilian environments. The legal proceedings concluded with Webb being sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. His mental illness was considered during sentencing, but the severity of his actions and their impact on 156 innocent lives determined the final outcome. Harold Chun established a scholarship fund for emergency medical training, inspired by Dr. Williams' life-saving intervention. His wife became an advocate for better cardiac emergency response training among airline crews, ensuring that future medical emergencies might be better managed. Sarah's photographs were eventually acquired by the National Archives as historically significant documentation of a major aviation security incident. Her work joined the permanent record of American history, ensuring that future generations could study the human dynamics of crisis and heroism. The airline industry credited the successful resolution of Flight 447 with preventing copycat incidents and improving overall aviation security. The swift, professional response demonstrated that even sophisticated hijacking attempts could be defeated through proper training and preparation. 6 months after the trial, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Commander Morrison appeared at her photography studio in Denver, carrying a small wrapped package. Inside was his service weapon, the same sidearm she had photographed him handing to Jennifer during the crisis. Morrison explained that military regulations had required him to surrender the weapon as evidence, but it had been returned after the trial concluded. He wanted Sarah to have it as a symbol of their shared experience and her role in documenting one of aviation history's most significant security incidents. Sarah was initially reluctant to accept such a meaningful gift, but Morrison insisted. He explained that her courage in continuing to document the crisis, even while fearing for her life, deserved recognition equal to any military medal. Her photographs had become crucial evidence in ensuring justice for all passengers. The presentation ceremony was private, attended only by other Flight 447 passengers who had remained in contact after their shared ordeal. Jennifer was there, as were Rodriguez, Dr. Williams, and Harold Chun with his wife. They had formed an unlikely family bound together by their survival of an extraordinary experience. Sarah's acceptance of Morrison's sidearm represented more than just receiving a gift. It symbolized her transformation from passive observer to active participant in the fight against those who would terrorize innocent people. Her camera had become as powerful a weapon as any firearm in the battle for truth and justice. The media coverage of the ceremony focused on the bond between strangers who had faced death together and emerged stronger for the experience. Sarah's story inspired other photographers and journalists to consider their role as documentarians during crisis situations. Years later, Flight 447 became a case study in aviation security training programs worldwide. Sarah's photographs were used to teach crisis recognition, response coordination, and the importance of civilian cooperation during emergency situations. Her accidental documentation had become an invaluable educational resource. The sidearm now sits in a place of honor in Sarah's studio, displayed alongside some of her most powerful photographs from that terrible day. Visitors often ask about its significance, providing opportunities for Sarah to share the story of ordinary people who became heroes when circumstances demanded extraordinary courage. Commander Morrison continued his military career, eventually retiring with full honors after serving his country for over 20 years. His actions on Flight 447 became legendary within SEAL training programs, demonstrating the importance of remaining ready for action even during routine civilian activities. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez pursued advanced education in psychology after his military service, specializing in the mental health aspects of terrorism and crisis intervention. His unique combination of explosive expertise and understanding of human behavior made him a sought-after consultant for federal agencies. Dr. Williams expanded her medical practice to include aviation medicine, working with airlines to improve emergency medical protocols and equipment. Her experience treating Harold Chun during the hijacking provided valuable insights into managing cardiac emergencies at altitude. Harold Chun lived for many more years, often speaking publicly about the importance of never giving up hope during desperate situations. His survival story, combined with gratitude for those who saved him, inspired countless others facing their own health crises. The legacy of Flight 447 extended far beyond the immediate participants. Sarah's photographs continued to be studied by security experts, psychologists, and historians seeking to understand how ordinary people respond to extraordinary threats. Her documentation provided insights that no stage simulation could ever replicate. In quiet moments, Sarah sometimes reflects on how a routine photography assignment became the most important work of her career. Her images from Flight 447 earned her numerous awards and recognition, but more importantly, they contributed to making air travel safer for millions of future passengers. The story of Flight 447 reminds us that heroism often emerges from the most unexpected sources. A quiet photographer, a SEAL commander, an Army sergeant, a dedicated doctor, and a professional flight attendant all played crucial roles in saving lives and defeating terrorism through their individual acts of courage and competence. Sarah's final photograph from Flight 447 shows passengers embracing after landing safely, their faces reflecting relief, gratitude, and the profound human connections forged through shared survival. It remains her most requested image, symbolizing humanity's capacity to overcome evil through ordinary people doing extraordinary things when the moment demands it. The sidearm given to her by Commander Morrison serves as a daily reminder that freedom and safety are never guaranteed, but must be defended by those willing to act when action is required. Her camera and his weapon had served the same purpose that day, protecting innocent lives and preserving the truth for history.